Hello, Mr. Vincent Ha. Welcome to the Home for Humanity podcast. Like I was just saying, this podcast is about discussions and interviewing people from all different parts of the real estate industry and getting people in touch with their humanity. So, welcome and
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
thank you for being here. Would you mind giving us a little introduction with who you are, and maybe we can get into your story from there, but just like a short, who are you and why are you here today to share some of your story with the world?
Sure. My name is Vincent Ha. By day, I'm a loan officer of 35 plus years with Axia Home Loans. I'm one of the senior loan consultants. I was the former manager of the Wells Fargo Bellevue downtown office. And before that, about a decade with um, Washington Mutual as one of their top loan consultants in the country. I also do a little bit of development on the side and a lot of advocacy for affordable housing and for government um, legislation to try to help the next generation and the community as a whole.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Um, how did you we first met at Hill Day earlier this year in Olympia, and I kept seeing you around, and I loved the energy that you had because you were kind of running all over the place. I guess I was too, because I kept running into you. And you are very passionate about the work that you do. And that really struck me. And that's why I walked up to you after a committee and was like, hey, let's have a conversation. Um, and part of what really struck me was your story and how real estate impacted your life. So can I ask you about how did that all come to be? What do you like to share about your story in real estate?
So I think my story started like a lot of children of immigrants. My parents came to this country basically in search of opportunities to try to have um, create something for our family. Um, if my father, when he was young, was a very successful businessman in Hong Kong. He had what most people would consider success. He owned his own business. He had properties. He had cars. He had his own um, Chinese beef jerky company, basically, in Hong Kong.
Nice.
But during World War II, he decided to serve and on the front lines during World War II as an ambulance driver, as well as the Army chaplain. So basically, when a bomb went off, everybody was running away from the bombs. My father would be running toward the explosion to try to save lives. And then if he couldn't save them, then he could read them their last rites. So basically, um, it was a very efficient model. But yeah, it was something that he was very passionate about because he wanted to save lives. He decided so much so that he gave up everything that he had and decided to serve the Lord and plant churches. So he planted churches in Vancouver, Victoria, British Columbia, where I was born, Honolulu, where I grew up, Southern California, and Northern California, where he's buried today. But when you start a church, you don't have a lot of money, so the churches didn't have very much that they could pay him. So basically, we lived on $50 a month and basically the Lord's grace. Um, whether it was hand-me-down clothes, we always had clothing. Whether it was food stamps or donations from people at the church, we always had food to eat. And the Lord always blessed. And during Christmas, the Ha kids always had the most Christmas toys. Everybody remembered us. And the church and the Lord was good to us. One of the things, though, he was smart enough to do was a little bit of money that he had left. He was able to buy a small property for us to live in. But because he didn't have enough money to make the monthly payments, he bought one with what we now call ADUs, an attached dwelling unit or a mother-in-law unit. And the rental income from that unit or from dadus, or in some cases duplexes, would be how he paid the mortgage. And he did that over and over and over again till he was able to create enough that mom was able to retire. And that's why I believe so much in the ADU and DADU and duplex stories that I hear from others as well, and why I advocate in Olympia as well as Washington, D.C., so that our children can have opportunities to be able to have that kind of opportunities, or people that need affordable housing can have a second income to help pay for the properties. So imagine if you are a parent and your child is thinking about buying real estate in today's world. It's a pretty daunting task when you think about it. The $20,000 homes don't exist anymore. They're all,
Yeah.
$1 million houses. And that's a pretty daunting task. But imagine if you had a second income with an ADU, or dad were to build in a big lot. He would have a big enough lot for maybe 185,000, 200,000. He could build a detached accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, or a dadu. Now, instead of trying to wait for condo builders to build a condo, you have a condo in the backyard. The child sells it for, let's say, 400,000 or 500,000 after it's gone up a little bit. And now he's got a down payment, and he's not starting from scratch in trying to save, even if it's 3%, 5%, or 20% down to buy his next property. He now has a grub stake to be able to buy his next property. Or if you're a senior citizen and you're living in a home and you're saying, okay, I could sell my house and hope I don't run out of money by the time I die, or, have to take a second job. What if I were to build a detached accessory dwelling unit, or a detached accessory dwelling unit, and live in it myself? Now I can rent out the big house myself, and now I have something to keep up with inflation, and also to be able to pass that generational wealth on to my children. So this is why I believe in the ADU and the DADU model, and why I think it's such an important thing for us to advocate for it, so we can create more inventory and wealth for the next generation, so we don't have a wealth gap between us and the next generation. So we can give them the same kind of opportunities that my parents and all of us have had an opportunity to do, which is build wealth through the creation of real estate. And this is, we don't want a generation of renters. We want to help them to be able to be homeowners and to be able to create that kind of wealth. The gap between, and this is a old statistic, so the numbers might be even more pronounced, but the average gap between a renter and a first-time home buyer, even if it's down payment assistance in these statistics, and it might be a little skewed because the people that can qualify for a home might, may have better income, but still, it's a 40x gap between that renter and the homeowner in the first 10 years. And we just can't have that kind of wealth gap for our children. We have to advocate for them. So that's why I'm so passionate about what we do at Washington Realtors, at Seattle King County Realtors Association, and at ARIA, the Asian Real Estate Association of America, where I served as the 2017 and 18 chapter president, and moved up to the national level and served as the national government policy chair, and the following last year as the national affordable housing chair, because this is something I'm passionate about. This is something that's important. I think we all as a community should stand up for our children.
Thank you for that. That is a beautiful introduction. And to clarify, you said your dad he did that with duplexes as well as dadus and adus, like he bought multiple properties that at least covered the cost themselves. And
correct.
Yeah. And do you
we
see
would live in one, and then we would rent out the other, and that basically paid our mortgage.
And he
And
did
so
a few times.
if you do that over and over again, you accumulate 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 5 of them. Either you pay them off in 30 years, or maybe you sell 2 or 3 of those and you pay off the others. Now all of a sudden you have a couple of properties that are free and clear, and you do it again and again until you create enough wealth that you can retire.
Do you?
Warren Buffett once said it best: if you don't find a way to make money while you're sleeping, you'll always be working.
Yeah.
So creating that passive income so you can retire, and so you can have that kind of income to help sustain you, is part of what real estate can do for us.
I think so many people find that process really daunting, because I've heard this the saying a couple times, like there is no such thing as passive income. And like yes, there's work involved, but like to your point, like there is still work to be done that does earn you money while you're sleeping, and it can come in all forms. But I think real estate specifically, have you come across the mentality that like that shouldn't be done? Like maybe too many investors already own too many of the properties, and now
Sure.
we have to build so more people can own more. Like, do you see any of like
And
the issues with that cycle, and what can, like, what's the new, not new message, but what can be done about that now?
yeah, and to be clear, I'm not saying everyone should be a landlord.
Sure.
I'm not saying everybody has to be a landlord. Now,
Right.
if you want to be, absolutely, I think it's a great business model. But if you don't want to be, just living in your home, period, is creating, even if it's only one house and you're living in it,
Mm-hmm.
you will always pay for a mortgage. It's just, will you pay somebody else's mortgage,
Right.
or are you going to pay your own mortgage and create wealth?
Yeah,
If you
good point.
simply buy one house and you live in it
Mm-hmm.
and you retire 30 years later, you've still paid off a home and created, millions of dollars that you may not have been able to save with a day-to-day paycheck, right?
And you're
A
still
lot
a
of
real
people
estate
make
investor.
money,
Yeah.
but they spend their money, right? They
Mm-hmm.
have to have, the new car. They have to have a Tesla. They have to have a Porsche. And all of a sudden, all that money that they've created and they've made all this money, they've made millions over their lifetime, but when they retire, all of a sudden, all the money is gone. What real estate does, forces you to, it almost forces you to save, because it's not liquid like a stock or even a savings in the bank that you're making, because you're spending it. So it almost forces you to save on top of the appreciation for the home. Now, people say, okay, well, real estate could be, risky. It could go down. Sure, it could. But, if you think about time, if you're thinking long term instead of short term, instead of day trading, you're investing. So let's say you bought that first home 40 years ago for $20,000 and you overpaid for it because it was multiple offers, and you really only should have paid 15,000 for it. Or even if it was a bubble and it went to 10,000. 40 years later, that home is sitting at an average cost in the neighborhood of over $1 million. There's no $20,000 houses left. Real estate is very forgiving. Even if you don't time it exactly right or buy the right types of properties in the right neighborhood or could have done something different, eventually over time, everybody wins. All those average homes are all over $1 million. So all I say is, people that are trying to time the market, or people who are saying, negative things about it, don't worry about them. Think about yourself. When you are ready and you can afford a home and you can find a way to be able to buy a home, then that's the best time to buy it. Not when the interest rates are high or when the interest rates are low, or you'll always miss the market if you're just waiting for that right timing.
Mm.
What is the best time to buy a house? The best time to buy a house is when you are ready to buy a house, not when the market says this or that. And if you think the long game, the jagged line will eventually trail up. If you're worried about, did I time it right? When is the Fed going to cut the rates? Oh my gosh, there's multiple offers. This is not the time. If you think that way, there's always going to be a reason why you shouldn't buy, and you'll miss the market.
This
The
isn't,
market's too hot. The market's too
yeah.
cold. The market might collapse. You'll be the one who misses, and not the person who bought that $20,000 house that's selling it for $2 million and has that generational wealth.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I mean, I focus a lot on like the stories and the perspectives we hold um about real estate and maybe our place in our home, because I feel like, I mean, I bought my first house, I guess, almost 10 years ago now, back in Missouri, and now I'm in Washington. And
Yeah.
I feel like how the housing culture was the biggest shock, and just like the way I've reframed what real estate does and is and means, and people's access to it, and been really surprised in all the different perspectives people hold on the ethics around it. And it's like not that surprising, right? Because land justice is,
Mhm.
and all justice is a worthwhile conversation, and the way it's being brought into real estate is really interesting to me, and how to live on land and with people and community um, ethically. It's really challenging. So I'm curious. I wanted to get into kind of the trends you mentioned, like the trend that real estate has been a good investment since, I mean, the last century and a half. Um, what have you seen in your time in finance and in real estate? Like, where do you see things going? Like, yes, this is a crisis now here. But do you think, like, because markets are local, I've gone back to different parts of the Midwest and been like, wow, houses are still really cheap here. Like, it doesn't seem
Yeah.
to be, inventory isn't as big of an issue there. And so, yeah, maybe across the country, but maybe here too, however you want to answer that. Like, where do you have hope for that wealth gap? Um, and do you think education and encouraging people to buy instead of renting is the big key there?
So there's a couple of very important um, things I think you touched on. First
Mm-hmm.
off, there's not if there is an inventory shortage, there is an inventory shortage crisis in this country. We are, from anybody's estimates, anywhere from 4 to 5 million units short in this country of the amount of inventory we have for people who need to buy or own homes. That's why you see the multiple offers. That's why you hear about it. It's not raising the interest rates doesn't solve that. Raising the interest rates to stop people from or as a matter of fact exasperates it, makes it even more unaffordable for those that are the most in need.
Yeah.
Somebody who's trying to buy with nothing down using a government program. You don't have to have 20% down to buy a house. There are
Right.
programs that the federal government has um, initiated that states disperse the money for, like the Washington State Housing Finance Commission's down payment assistance program, for example. If anyone's interested, please let me know. But for people that are trying to buy their first home that don't have enough um, income and are in that type of a situation where they cannot save enough to get ahead of the curve,
Yeah.
this money is allows you to borrow 3 to 5%. So that allows you to have the down payment and part, if not all, of the closing costs that you can use to be able to buy your first home. So you don't have to wait, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years till you save up enough money to have 20% down to buy a house. That's a misnomer that a lot of people don't know. And they say, well,
Yeah.
there's no way I'm ever going to save 20% down on $1 million house. I'm going to save 200,000. I'm living check to check. I'm barely getting by. How am I ever going to save $200,000 to be able to buy my first home? You don't necessarily have to have 20% to be able to buy it. There are government programs that allow you to pay 3% down, 5% down. There are programs that will allow you, the Washington State Housing Finance Committee's program, for example, not only lends you that 3 to 5%, there's no payment on that 3 to 5% down payment program on that loan. And you don't have to pay it back until you sell the house or refinance it. So these are kinds of programs to allow you to have home ownership and to be able to create, hopefully, some kind of wealth rather than just paying month to month for a rent. Maybe it's not your dream house, but you know what? If you sacrifice a little and you do that in the long run, that's how you can create enough wealth to be able to buy that dream house if you're, so inclined, or, hopefully retire in the future. Real estate changes lives. And why we advocate is so that others have that same kind of opportunity so we can help the whole community. We can help close the wealth gap for those that have been marginalized and forgotten, for the Black, Hispanic, and the communities that have that wealth gap because of the redlining situations that happened before. It doesn't just hurt them, it echoes because then their children don't have the same kind of opportunities to go to the same kind of schools or go to the same kind of colleges. And that echoes over and over again. But on the reverse side, when you create home ownership, not only do you help that family, you help their children and their children's children,
Yeah.
and you reverse that and you echo a creation of wealth so that wealth gap can close.
So it's like
And so if
choosing
we're
your
looking about trying
sacrifice.
to help those that are most needy and most marginalized, it's um, it not only includes people of minorities, but it also includes our children. And we don't want to have that wealth gap where a whole generation doesn't have that opportunity. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. And that's why I go to Olympia, and that's why I go to Washington, D.C., so we can fight to try to have programs to allow more down payment assistance programs for those that need it. So we can have more inventory so that opportunities will be available for our children, and so we can close that wealth gap.
Yeah, thank you for that. Um, what do you see as the biggest barrier right now? I mean, education is what's coming to my mind because um that's so far the population as a newer agent. Like I just speak to so many people who when I was a brand new agent, I saw interest rates double and
Mm,
everyone was saying priced out of
yeah.
the market, priced out of the market. And that
Mhm.
I just got so angry. I'm like, how can you just price entire people out of the market? I mean, people who
Entire
saved for
segments.
10 years
Absolutely.
and then poof, like their chances and um do you see where do you see education or maybe back to perspective? I don't know.
Mm.
You mentioned a lot of barriers or and then some ways around that with the down payment assistance, but is there any more um like linchpins that you
So there's
think
a
you
couple of
really
things
are
that you
focusing
touch
on?
on that I think are super, super important. The Fed is not a bunch of bad guys that are just trying to make people's lives bad and miserable. They're actually trying to do good when they do what they do, right? And why does the Fed do what they do? Well, the Fed looked at the economy and says it's overheating. All these multiple offers are crazy. Right after COVID, we had historically low rates. We were down to 3%, 2.5% rates, and everybody's flooding into the market and trying to buy homes. But the problem was we didn't have enough inventory. And so what the Fed is trying to do is to slow down inflation because people are on fixed incomes who are senior citizens, for example.
Yeah.
And if the cost of food and gas and everything else in housing goes up so high, but their income is level, they're forced into poverty, right? And so we're to try to close the gap. What they're trying to do is slow down the economy so we don't have like an IPO where the stock goes double and then comes plunging back down. They're trying to tap the brakes and slow it down so it's more of a 5%, 10% growth and it's more sustainable. So that's why the Fed raises the rates. Now, did that help? I could argue that that was one of the biggest factors of why we have so much inflation today, is because, yes, we did bring down the inflationary numbers, but a lot of that was also because of recessionary and recessionary environment, because you had tech companies suddenly laying off people getting in situations where all of a sudden they didn't have income. So now all of a sudden they're not spending money, and so the GDP goes down, right? And the rate of inflation goes down. Is that good? I don't know. Not for the person who got laid off, it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Did it solve the situation? Maybe, because at some point in time, the Fed, although there were some unintended consequences with it, and makes it so difficult for those that are actually in need, because now that home, which was really unaffordable for them or barely affordable at 3%, is completely unaffordable when you're at 7.5% or 7.25%, right? And so what you've done is you've really hurt those that need it the most. The
Yeah.
Fed doesn't want to do that. They want to create a situation where the economy doesn't have runaway inflation. They tap the brakes, they tap the brakes. Now they see these recessionary numbers are coming, because remember, when you're reading these numbers, they're trailing numbers. So they're not current numbers, they're numbers from the last quarter or what has happened previous. And we already see this person get unemployed or these companies lay off all these people. Well, those numbers will translate eventually in the next quarter or the next 2 quarters, maybe, to numbers that the Fed then can say, oh, now I see that the economy is not an inflationary, but a recessionary state. And so then they cut the rates. And so that's why you hear all these people talking about the Fed cutting the rates. I would say, in my opinion, it'll probably be the latter quarters of this year, if not the first quarters of next year, before the Fed actually has enough of those trailing numbers to be able to support their argument to make those rate cuts. When they do make those rate cuts, there are people right now who will say, hey, the rate's too high. I'm going to wait till the rates come down. Well, what happens when that happens? Now you have a whole bunch of people that are sitting on the sideline that are renting. Remember those multiple offers that we had right after COVID when everybody had those low interest rates?
Mm-hmm.
Those people didn't go away just because they raised the rates. All they did is they said it was the great hesitation. They all rented. They all just said, screw this. I'm not going to pay 7%. I'm done. I'm not going to fight multiple offers. I'm done. I'm just going to go rent. I'm going to go to the Braver and I'm going to go rent a nice apartment. And I'm going to live my life now, right? And so they went and they rented. But all those people are waiting for that rate cut so they can come all piling back in. The solution is not raising the rates or lowering the rates even, although that will help with affordability when the rates are lowered. The solution really to solve the problems that we have in this country is creating more inventory, helping to allow the permitting process to be cheaper and less tedious, helping to create financing opportunities for people to be able to build housing, helping us to be able to build ADUs and DADUs more easily. So instead of waiting for the condo builders to finally come to our state and build condos, we're building our own condos. They're just not on top of each other. They're just in people's backyards. And that creates inventory. And that is the only way we're going to have more opportunities for more people and more affordability for our economy here in Washington. That's why I'm so passionate about what we do. And that's why I think ADUs and DADUs are a good solution. And lot splitting or allowing people to build 2 units instead of 1 on a piece of land, for example, allows us to be able to create more, because the biggest cost to build for a builder is the land. So instead of building 1, now he can build 2, and there's an opportunity for it to pencil. Obviously, there are other things that come with that. We have to be careful about the infrastructure, making sure that we can handle the traffic, making sure that we have enough of a teacher-student ratio, thinking about these kinds of things, and parks that are, for our children to be able to play in. These are all important issues, but if we don't create inventory, we don't create the tax dollars to be able to solve those. So that's an important part as well, because, our state doesn't have income tax. So really all of our economy is based on housing and the taxes that we collect from that. And if you are not careful, that's where you hurt your state's economy. So that's why creating more wealth through that also allows us to fund all these other programs that we all want, right? So those people that are anti-progress and anti-housing, they forget all those other programs. They say, why should money go there? We should be doing this, we should be doing that. Well, if you want to do this and that, you have to fund it somehow.
Yeah.
And so that's the reason why housing is such an important part of it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I really hear you speaking to bringing people's awareness to there's trends in the recessionary and the inflationary. Is that how you said it? I describing them as these are actions and movements of a very alive economy, and things are moving constantly. And that's what I saw a lot of people do. They were out looking and then they were like, oh, I'm just going to keep renting. But that's what's happening on the macro level too, when we look by not just these little seasons, but the years. And we have a generation of renters that are so, I have overheard conversations of hopeless people talking about their house search where they are giving up. They're either leaving the state or they're renting.
It's absolutely heartbreaking.
It is. And I think that's part of my intention with this podcast, is to bring hope that buying a piece of land and living there is not an evil or unachievable thing. It's worthwhile, and there are pros and cons, but like you said earlier, there's a sacrifice either way. So pick your sacrifice. And if people can get out of, I think that's one of the tricky things in our in our culture right now. It's like the instant gratification, the technology, and just the ways that we can only really see, and the focus on the present. I think there's a lot of pros to people really coming to awareness with the present moment, but forgetting in that there are future generations that rely on us to make good land choices. And
Yes.
inventory. So you mentioned inventory. I am also stoked about inventory filling up in people's backyards. Now, there's a lot of questions about sprawl, and I live in a rural area. I live in the county,
Yes.
rural King County, and um, this is where people are moving, and this is also where people don't want things to be built. So there's this
Yeah.
huge like clash of, well, that the additional housing is either illegal or like, yeah, people are still renting when they could be building nice little homes on the land out here. But um, do you have any thoughts about like what are the environmental groups doing to both help wise building out in rural counties, or do they not want it at all?
Well, you
What's the
have to
line
have the
there?
intention, right? You have to have the intention of thinking about the big picture. What people are worried about is they watch um, television and they see Yellowstone and they say, oh my God, these evil builders, these evil developers are going to come to our town and they're going to ruin our way of life, right? They're going to ruin the way of life. They're not thinking of them creating inventory for their children. They're thinking of these evil, and there are, don't get me wrong, there are evil people in this world, but they don't necessarily all have to be builders evil. And not all builders are evil, by the way. I built myself and I don't
And
think I'm evil. I,
no, not
I,
at
I
all.
do it to try to help people. But
We need the
yes, I
skill.
do try to make money, of course, like everybody else does. Of course, we want it to
Yeah,
pencil. Otherwise, I won't be able to feed my four children either. So
exactly,
somehow, some
exactly.
way, we have to do it. Now,
Yep.
can you do it with the intention of making sure that it's progressive and it's well thought out?
Hmm.
Yes, right? When we're building, we have to think about how are we going to do this? So if we're going to create more people and traffic is already bad enough, what do? We build a light rail. Why are we building the light rail? So we can build vertically next to that light rail and create a carless opportunity where we're not flooding the world with more traffic in our neighborhood, right? And so if you look at progress, Vancouver really doesn't have much of a freeway. It has like one freeway. They've done it with light rail. Tokyo, New York, San Francisco. If you look at progress, this is what major cities do because as everybody wants to move to your city and it becomes more and more desirable, like
Hmm.
Seattle is growing by leaps and bounds. I think some estimates were as high as 100,000 new people coming in, by the motor vehicles numbers of, licensees or what have
Yeah.
you. 100,000 people coming in. Are we building 100,000 new units to keep up with that? No. And then what about the children that we have? Don't they want to own as well as they come of age, right? So we have to create more and more inventory to be able to solve it, but we can be intentional about it and be smart about it, right? We can build ways where we can handle that infrastructure, we can handle that traffic, and we can think about it intentionally. We build on light rails. We build in situations where we can create walk scores so people can walk to their stores. Bellevue is a wonderful example of that. For example, I used to live in downtown Bellevue where I could walk to QFC. I could walk across the street to the park. I could walk to Bellevue Square. It was beautiful, right? So we're creating those kinds of situations where we can have intentionally well thought out progress creating inventory but not ruining the neighborhood, you can do it. We did it in Bellevue. We're doing it in Kirkland. Look at what they're doing in Totem Lake, right? So we
Mhm.
can do that. We can create inventory, but be intentional about it to where we are thinking about how we are going to be able to handle enough water and sanitation to be able to handle the traffic, handle all these kinds of things that come with progress. But um, being intentional about it and being smart about it and still allowing to create that inventory so we can solve that problem. So we can try to create more inventory and more affordability. So when interest rates come down, you think multiple offers right now are bad. Imagine what it's going to be when we come back down to the 5% rates. When it gets back to the 6.5% rate, we saw a big spike suddenly. Then rates were peaked at 8%, believe it or not, 8%. Holy crap. I didn't sit there for long, but oh my gosh, that's just nuts. For all
Yeah.
those people that were at 3%, they said,
3.
what? 8%? This is crazy, right? And it came back down suddenly to 6.5%, and oh, we had a big surge. And that was just a preview of what's going to happen, right, when the Fed comes. And there was just a big surge, and it was multiple offers again. And it was, oh my God, there's 30 offers. I'm going to have to pay way too much for the house. That's not good either, right?
Right.
So raising rates, lowering rates don't really solve it. Inventory is the only way we're going to solve it. We have to allow more supply. We have to make the permitting issues less onerous on the builders. We have to create financing opportunities and attract developer money to be able to build more inventory, and allowing the mom and pop builders to be able to build their ADUs and their DADUs or lot split and build 2 houses, so we can have more units and more affordable units and options, so that our children, our children's children, and for you and me, and for all of us, and for that first time home buyer who is trying to buy, we have to create opportunities for them. And then we also have to have government money to be able to supplement those that are the most needy and those that need that down payment assistance program. Third thing a lot of people don't think about is credit scores. So being of Asian descent, this is one of the things we went to Washington, D.C. to talk about. When we look at the statistics of what is the biggest reason from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac of why Asians are turned down, income was one, because a lot of them worked under the table, working in restaurants or what have you. And so they were getting tips or doing that type of thing. Well, we really can't make a federal program for something like that, because obviously, we know what happened during the meltdown when we do stated income. So that part we couldn't do. But what the second biggest reason was credit thinness or credit invisibility, because we're taught as a young Chinese individual. My father came and said, well, don't take on debt, pay cash for everything, right? And so we don't have debt. We don't think about it until we try to apply for a house, and all of a sudden they pull up a credit report and we're credit thin or credit invisible even. Was I responsible in paying my bills? I would argue maybe even more responsible, because I was paying cash and not taking on debt just to pay more debt. But because of that model, we weren't showing up. So one of the things we advocated for when I was in national government policy chair and we got passed is there will be a new credit model that will incorporate some of the debts that we are paying in a generation. So the credit score is like a 100-year-old model. It doesn't look at everything that we pay. There was no cell phone back then. There was no cable back then. There was, very little student loan debt back then because the cost of education wasn't as it is today. But these are all bills that our children and we are paying, but we're not being counted. So the new credit scoring model that will be passing into law, that's already been passed by both sides of the aisle, that will be incorporated by Fannie and Freddie, that you'll be seeing rolled out, is from direct actions of what we did to advocate in Washington, D.C., and they have passed it. So you are going to see new credit scoring models that will come out that will include rental income as part of that, that will include that cable and the cell phone bills and these student loan debt things that were preventing people from owning. That was another thing that we were trying to advocate against, because the cost of education for our children is so much more than when we were, when I went to a little private college, I got a scholarship and I said, whoa, $2,000 a year, I'm rich. You're going to pay my whole college tuition.
Nice, yeah.
Now our kids are looking at it and saying, whoa,
it's
going to cost me
2 books.
$100,000, to go to college. And that kind of debt, buries them when they try to apply for a house. So these are things that we're trying to fight for and advocate for, so our children can own homes as well.
Oh, I love that the rental income is happening, because I've, friends, dear friends, family members, clients, they owned and then they rented and they owned and then they rented, and then like all of that good rental history, it makes it harder to own again. And so it's like, even if, these people through different chapters, you still like, fabulous. What's in our last little bit of time, I want to get into why are the Washington Realtors and Aria and like you've spoken well first before we get into that, I just want to recap some of the tips that you have shared. I just want to highlight and recap for people that you mentioned. Don't wait for the rate. Like, don't worry about the rate as much as whether or not you are ready to own on that piece of land. Incentivizing ADU. So homeowners currently who have that, no, I don't want to build more housing in my neighborhood feeling, but maybe they have the little lot that they could split or something, like also meeting those folks and helping them see the value of community, the value of people coming to their home and sharing resources and help offsetting their financial costs and even the stewardship costs, like the labor of tending a bigger place. Like I think there's a lot of hope for people with the land to build, getting them on this, like helping
Yeah,
them see like, oh, dadus are a great option because humans aren't all bad. I think there's some
yeah,
of that story in there too. Um, and see what else. Keep your credit up. I think that's a good one.
yeah.
I mean, I was also growing up like don't cash for everything. I had Dave Ramsey, you know, all through childhood, saying telling me to be credit invisible, but that's not a great thing when it comes to housing and mortgage. So thank you for that.
Right.
Um, yeah, back to
We
Washington
have a,
Realtors. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead, Washington Realtors.
Yeah, what is the big pull for you? Like you're saying, you get to do a lot of this advocacy through these organizations and associations. Um, what do you have to say to someone who is on the fence about being in the association or ARIA or any of the associations? And I guess maybe partly to me, because to be honest with you, my membership just lapsed and I'm like, should I sign up or not? So you can tell me like, here, Sarah, why
Yeah.
do you sign up? But also to anyone, and maybe
Why
start with
realtors,
Washington
right?
Realtors
Why
and
Washington Realtors? Why
yeah,
NAR, right? We hear
yeah,
all this stuff in the news. Why do I pay dues? Why do I do this? Why Seattle King County Realtors Association?
yeah.
The reason for all of this is um, advocacy that we can do together is what makes a difference, right?
Mm,
So when we had our wedding, my wife's family owns China Harbor over in Lake Union, and we had, I think, 400 some odd people at our wedding, and we gave them all a little set of gold chopsticks with a little saying on it. And what the saying basically said is, one chopstick is easy to break, but together as a family, we are an unbreakable bundle.
mm,
That's why Seattle King County Realtors, that's why Washington Realtors, that's why ARIA, the Asian Real Estate Association of America, because as a national voice together, as a community voice, as a state voice, we can advocate. We have the power to be able to go to our legislators, and we're not just one vote now. We are a million vote organization when we go to Washington, D.C., and we show up on the doorstep of our legislators and advocate and try to talk about these situations and try to share the insight that we have instead of just one person complaining. We're a million people advocating. So that's the reason why we do what we do as a community. That's why I do what I do on an individual basis. That's why I serve on so many committees and do so many things with ARIA, with the Asian Real Estate Association, with our local Seattle King County Realtors Association, with Washington Realtors. I serve on all of these different committees and do all these things because to me, if nobody does it and everybody says, well, somebody else will do it, then
mm-hmm.
nobody does it, right? If everybody says, well, that somebody else can do it, then nobody does it, right? So we all have to do it together. So that's the reason I do what I do. That's the reason why I implore you, if you're interested, please come to me, talk to me. You don't necessarily have to run a committee. You could start off just volunteering in a committee, or even coming to just about some of our government legislative uh, committee meetings. You know, they're open. You just need to come in and find out what's going on so you know what we're advocating for, and so you can be part of that solution and you can help to polarize more voters so we can try to solve these situations and we can try together to make this a better world for all of our children and for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Amen. I mean, I think becoming more involved with the advocacy side of real estate instead of just there's so many avenues and pathways and things to learn. And like earlier you mentioned redlining and
Mm.
like how some of these past patterns in real estate, I mean, how are they still happening, and why advocacy is still important
Right.
now and in the future, because um just like patterns of advocacy and justice help bring to light certain things, like the patterns of injustice are still buried, I think. And um justice has been on my mind lately, I guess, and so that's why I'm bringing it up today. And it's a big part of what people feel when they feel like they've been priced out of these certain pathways, like the feeling of this isn't fair are the words that I
Mhm.
hear. The emotions are anger and frustration and like
Yeah.
despair because they
Yeah.
had it and then it was taken. And I think that human experience is everywhere, and it's part of, yeah, thank you so much for your work around this
Yeah.
and continuing the conversation and
Hmm.
helping all
So
people.
I'm the DEI chair for Seattle King County Realtors, as well
Hmm.
as serving on the committee at Washington Realtors, on the DEI committee.
Yeah.
DEI's gotten a bad name recently. So I think there's a lot of pushback. And part of it is um, a misunderstanding of what it is. So
Okay.
diversity, equity, and inclusion means we are trying to help home ownership for um, serving some of those that are underserved, for speaking up against those that are being prejudiced and redlined against. For example, in Florida, there is a movement right now that actually passed, or a law that actually passed, which started in Texas, that excludes Chinese nationals from buying real estate, for example, in this country. How it started really was back in Texas. So in Texas, what happened was there was a misconception that all this crazy rich Asians were coming in and creating the inflation in their neighborhood and buying up all their homes. And
Oh.
so there was a backlash. They're saying, okay, all of these people are, how do we know these people are not communists coming from China? How do we know they're not the government from China buying up US land? And so there was all this um, misconception. If anything, if you really want to know, that Asian money are not communists. They're people running away from communists. They're people trying to leave the country. The government doesn't go to Chinese people and say, "Hey, here's some money. Go buy some real estate in U.S. so we can be evil." That doesn't happen, right? So these are people that are actually fleeing from China, that are actually trying to be part of the American dream, just like all our ancestors did, whether it was the Irish, the Italian, the Jewish, the Black, the Hispanic. They just happen to be more recent, right? So they're coming to this country and they're trying to be able to have that American dream as well. What happened was somebody decided, it was a wealthy individual that came into Texas, but he wanted to buy a large piece of land, and it was an agricultural piece of land. And it just so happened, whether he was going to develop, he was going to grow something, whatever it was, or build a whole bunch of homes. Um, the town folk says, "Well, wait a second. I don't know. That's a little close to the military base. How do we know that's not a communist Chinese person coming to spy on us?" Well, how do we know? First off, why do you think Chinese are the only bad actors, right? Why don't we just have, why should we allow anyone to build next to a military base, I would argue, right? So I don't think it should be Chinese or Russian or anybody that should be precluded from buying land. I think we all should not be able to buy land, to be perfectly honest, in my opinion, when we're talking about public safety. But at any rate, when that happened, then there were echo waves that went, and over 20 states decided they were going to pass similar laws, right? And so
Yeah.
Florida, Texas, we were able to fight it and overcome it. Florida actually passed it. Um, this is not a red or a blue issue. This is about the opportunity for fair housing and the American dream. The Chinese were the only race that were actually ever in history precluded and stopped from actually owning real estate in this country, believe it or not.
Mm.
When if you go back in time, when Chinese labor came into this country to build the railroads,
Mhm.
they were brought over here and they were paid, for backbreaking labor to build these railroads that people didn't want to build. And they said, "Oh, they're taking our jobs." oh my gosh, these evil Chinese. And so Chinese were not allowed to buy real estate during the Exclusion Act. When they finally were allowed to buy real estate, they were given the land that nobody wanted. And they were given what was the most least undesirable, and that was our reservation, basically, for the Chinese. And believe it or not, that is what Chinatowns are. So if you go in this country and you see a Chinatown, you say, oh, this food is great, this is wonderful. The history behind it was that was actually the only real estate that Chinese were allowed to buy because it was the worst piece of real estate that nobody else wanted. And they were not allowed to buy anywhere else in the country except those Chinatowns. And so if you go to most Chinatowns in this country, you'll still, not all of us are crazy rich Asians. Go to, I would challenge you to go to almost any Chinatown in this country, and you still see that poverty that echoed from what happened many years ago. And so this is part of why we're trying to advocate to try to create more opportunities. We're not looking for anti-whites or to punish people from what their ancestors did. We're just looking for inclusion and opportunities for those type of people that are that have been hurt to be able to have opportunities for them as well as their children and their children's children. And that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion is about, standing up to those laws that are stopping opportunities from people to be able to buy real estate, for example. We have to be for the voice for those that can't speak up for themselves. And that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion means. It doesn't mean being anti-white and punishing people for what their ancestors and their ancestors did. What we're doing basically is we're trying to stand up to allow opportunities in the American dream and fair housing for everybody.
That is the sacred period, I think, to our conversation. Like that, I have nothing that encapsulates so much of the spirit of my work. I feel like I got into nature connection and community building before I became a real estate professional. And the ways that I see this profession and industry and like the tools that we have here in 2024, my personal utopian ideals aside, like this is where I am, this is what we have. The kids are growing up now, like our elders need our help now, everything, this is.
And this is win-win, by the way. We're not looking to punish people or give people things that they don't deserve over other people that happen to be born a different race. This is serving to try to help to create generational wealth, but also it's win-win. So it's sales for the realtors, it's loans for the loan officers, it's buyers for builders and developers, and opportunities for all the other people that are laboring to build the homes, or title reps or insurance agents. We are creating all these jobs and this wealth by doing it, and at the same time doing some good. So by serving that in creating opportunities for people that happen to be marginalized or needy, doesn't necessarily mean you are giving a home to somebody who doesn't deserve it over somebody who does deserve it, or picking somebody because he's non-white to have opportunity they shouldn't have. That's not what this is about. This is about creating opportunities and looking for hurdles that are preventing home ownership and trying to remove those hurdles so we can all win and make it win-win for all of us. Yeah. So the realtors can have more sales, so the loan officers can have more loans, for the builders to have more people to buy, and at the same time we're doing some good, by the way, to create some generational wealth
for populations who seriously need it. And that's like, it's becoming like
and our children,
the entire middle class and the future generations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Changing lives through real estate is what I call it.
It is.
What we call it. That's what Aria calls our campaign, Changing Lives Through Real Estate.
Because it does. And it's a more challenging, higher level conversation to have about like, well, what does diversity and equity and inclusion and justice, what do those things actually look like? Because it's like this outdated, like black and white Puritan, my belief, thinking that like if this happens, then this happens. And it's like, it is not that simple. We have got.
It's not about complaining, right? It's about creating opportunities for all of us and trying to be able to make the American dream, and not just one person, not just for a few, but for everybody. So
Thank you
that's what
for
it is.
saying that. Yeah, I have this deep love for this land, and the cultural story of America is one that I feel very passionate about meeting and merging and redirecting into a healthier version of our story, because yeah, this whole story of we're doomed and we're evil and there's nothing we can do about it. I'm here to prove that we can do something about it and there is hope.
Let's change lives through real estate. Let's change the world
Let's do
together.
it. Thank you, Vincent. And is there anything that you want to like final words that you want people to know about you, or how they can reach out to you before we leave for today or wrap it up?
Aria.org, areaa.org, area with an extra A. So aria.org. I encourage any of you who want to get involved and want to serve our dynamic community. Um, it's only $99 a year, and we have multiple events coming up. I'm speaking of ADUs and DADUs. I am the government policy chair for the Aria, and our first event is next month on the 13th at the Hilton in downtown Bellevue. That will be from, I think, 3 o'clock to 5, no, 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. I apologize. You'll look for it online, Aria, areaa.org, or look for us in the Facebook page, or reach out to me. I'm Vincent Ha. Um, and I would be happy to have you at one of our events, or to get more involved with ARIA so we can help you help more people change lives through owning real estate.
Mm-hmm. And who can be a member of ARIA? Can anybody be a member?
Anybody, you don't have to be Asian to want to serve our community. If you are a real estate agent, if you are a lender, if you're a title rep, if you are an insurance agent that wants, you're a builder, you're somebody who's thinking about building ADUs and DADUs, flipping homes are much more difficult to pencil, but when you add an additional unit, suddenly a lot of things pencil. If you're interested in any of these things, we have an ADU DADU workshop coming up, event next month. We have the head of Washington, UW's land use professor will be one of our speakers. We have Jeff McCann. We have a number of developers who are actually developing and building these. We have one of the premier real estate attorneys speaking, who also talk to you about how do you condoize those ADUs and DADUs, or how do you go through the permitting process to be able to apply, to be able to do this. If you're interested and you want to learn more about it, please come to our event. I would love to meet you there. I'm Vincent Ha, and it was my pleasure to have an opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, Mr. Ha. And that you said that's on the 13th next month, June?
13th of next month at the
Oh.
Hilton in Bellevue. And if anyone needs to reach out to me, my personal cell phone number is 206-321-1881, 206-321-1881. Text me, call me. If anyone needs a loan, or wants to build, or wants to know more about it, or wants to join ARIA, or wants to serve on our DEI committee, please reach out to me. I would love to meet all of you.
Thank you, sir. It was an absolute honor to have you on the Home for Humanity podcast. I hope our paths cross
Thank
again
you,
soon.
Sarah, for what you do and for your podcast.
Thank you so much.